Welcome back to the Will Sims podcast. My guest today is Derrick Credito, um, one of the first few returning guests. I did have my buddy Taylor on. He was my first returning guest, but you're the second. And you've got a new album coming out. I believe you have some singles that should be dropping soon. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We have one single that was released in January called Wicked World. It's been making the rounds on Spotify. And there's a new single that's due in just a couple days called I Know the Feeling, which I'm really excited about releasing just a couple days before Valentine's Day.
Nice. And is this album going to be under your name, or is it under like a project name?
It's under the name Credito. It's just released sort of eponymously in the style of many of my favorite rock and rollers from, I guess, the late 80s. There's like Van Halen, Bon Jovi. It was very popular back in those days for rock bands to just have like a last name for a name. And so, I guess you could say I'm kind of following in that style.
That's pretty cool. I like that. Um, so yeah, the full album will be out March 14th. Is that correct?
Yes, March 14th. On that exact same day, we'll be doing a CD release party at Zen West with Brad Cox and a host of other great acts. A band called Luca is headlining.
Nice. That's cool.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. I see you recorded it with Mat-Leffler Shulman at Mobtown.
Matt did. He was the mastering engineer. So he was sort of like the final sort of layer on the audio engineering. But yes, he did a fabulous job. Couldn't be prouder of the work that we've accomplished. And it was recorded in the home studio of Christian Alfonso, who was also sort of responsible for arrangements, additional instruments from guitar to keyboards. He really just did it all, and so there's a lot of great people on this record, and so it's really so much more to me than just a solo effort. It really feels like it's a group effort.
That's cool. So the album is called Irreverent Soul, and where does that name come from?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I guess you could say that Irreverent Soul is sort of like a title that reflects my own personal evolution. Um, Around the time when I turned 40, it's like 2018. So you can do the math and figure out where I am right now. But in 2018, I was 40 years old and I was kind of going through a bit of a crisis. And I started writing a fiction novel, but I had kind of withdrawn from the music scene and really just became a stay-at-home musician. And I wasn't really very active with music and didn't really have any goals or dreams with music as I had had for so much of my life. Like I think all my life, I guess I was basically just focused on music and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was out of it. But at that time, I started going to synagogue and and I was just participating in like the liturgy, I guess the songs that would be sung mostly in Hebrew. And I didn't necessarily understand what I was singing, and I was new to Judaism. I had converted to Judaism like within a year of my 40th birthday, but my involvement with music in a synagogue is really what kept me musical, and which it just was really nice just to hear people say nice things about my voice or to just express something nice about the fact that I could just pick up Hebrew and just start singing it. And while I'm no longer observant or anything like that, I do certainly credit Baltimore's Jewish community for giving me a space to kind of keep music alive in my life. And at a time where I didn't really have anything going on as far as like I wasn't writing songs, I wasn't playing out. I had even stopped going to open mics, which was a pretty nice staple in my life in the 2010s. I was really a big open micer. Um, And so Irreverent Soul, I think, just reflects my evolution, that I tend to, evolve away from, from traditional religion. And it doesn't mean that it's never been a part of my life or my routine, but it's just that in my life, I tend to move away from things that are considered, cultic or sacred. And um, and I guess you could say that irreverent is how I feel, like as sort of like maybe like a backlash. Like I feel like I've maybe no longer have to wear the mask. If I have something to say, I'm going to say it. If I want to be outspoken, I'm going to be outspoken. And I feel like that's where the irreverent part comes from.
Nice. Yeah, it's nice when you have a space that kind of like allows you to grow musically, creatively. Um, I think the closest thing I had to that was when I was in high school. I would bring my guitar to school every day, and it probably annoyed a lot of people, but they didn't like tell me no, so it kind of felt like they were allowing it to happen. Although, like looking back, I can only imagine like my guitar was out of tune. I was trying to play songs and didn't really know that much, but that's really cool, man.
Thanks, man. That sounds a lot like what it was like for me in high school too, because I guess you could say that playing guitar, when I started getting good enough to kind of just play in the corridors or to play where some of my classmates might take notice, I feel like that was when I started getting the respect of my peers. Whereas prior to that, I didn't really have a lot of social capital and didn't really have anything to bring to the table. And then before you know it, by the end of my 10th grade year, I had like the jocks on the football team asking me to teach them how to play Interstate Love Song or something like that, you know?
Nice. That's pretty cool. So what I want to do is kind of do like a track by track, and so I'll kind of give you like uh, like what I picked up from the track, and then you can tell me like a little bit about what it was like making it. If you want
Yeah.
to get into like the stories of the song, I've always been one of those guys. Like I like people to interpret my music, but I know like sometimes I feel like with this album in particular, there's a lot of like messages you're trying to convey with each song, which I appreciate. So the opening track is "Wicked World." It's got one of my favorite lines on the album, which is, "When they see that I swing liberally, they want nothing to do with me," which is really like you know, just kind of a call, like a acknowledgement of today's political climate of, if you don't agree with me, I want nothing to do with you. And
Yeah. Well, that line comes from a very personal place. Um, I grew up in a family of, just like working class, very conservative people, and they never really evolved or changed. And, and as I grew up and eventually I started a family of my own, um, when my family is biracial and I recall like all my conservative relatives would come around and say, "Oh, you have a beautiful family." And I just remember when my brother died, and I hadn't seen any of them in a long time. I went over to one of their houses because there was like a sort of a little family get together. And I was kind of disappointed where everybody wanted to see my kids. Everybody wanted to hold my daughters. I guess they were very little at the time. And but there was no interest in me, and there was nobody even really commemorating my brother who had just passed away from a drug overdose, about almost 4 years ago. And so I was really disappointed that, like, I have an aunt who is like really active in Republican politics. And before, you know, anything else was said, it was like, oh yeah, I want you to check out this guy who I'm campaigning for. And it was this Republican guy that was running for some seat. And I was just such a disappointment that, like, even in a time of tragedy, that there's still that political sort of, activism just doesn't even take a break. And and I guess I've been fairly political, but every once in a while I need to step away from it because I just need to, like, you know, connect with people, regardless of what their beliefs are. I feel like that's something we need more of. We need more understanding and we need reconciliation and we need unity. And I don't feel like that's something that has been very available in recent years. And so I guess you could say that, you know, I've heard that a lot. Like, oh, your family, you have beautiful children, but there's no interest in me as a person. And so I guess you could say I appreciate that you identify that as a favorite line because it really is a one of the most personal, I guess, revealing lines in that song.
Yeah, I guess for a lot of people, like once you have a family, they kind of assume that that's basically your whole life is family, and they don't really think about like what other things you got going on that are interesting, you know. All right, next song is "Death to the Man," which definitely seemed like kind of a stab at our political climate. What it, what can you tell me
Well,
about this song?
absolutely. Well, Death to the Man is not about like one person. It's oftentimes mistaken for being targeted at any one individual, which it is not. But in 2022, we were coming out of COVID. I remember Roe versus Wade was overturned, and I wasn't even writing songs at that point. I was playing bass in an EDM band called Echo Echo. I was playing bass in a band I've been with for a long time called My Useless Self with Nico Sells. And and so I was happy doing that. I mean, even though I was about a year, I lost my brother about a year before that, but I felt like I was coming out of that pretty happy. My book was about to be published and I was playing in two bands. But when Roe versus Wade was overturned, it just hit me in such a way that I just said, I'm going to write a song called Death of the Man. And a buddy of mine named Lucas, who lives down south somewhere like North Carolina or Georgia, he recommended for me a song by Alkaline Trio, a very cool band that I'm actually was not familiar with. After listening to that one song, it kind of gave me the idea to build Death to the Man on a bass line, which I had never tried before. And I just kind of wrote it about what I was feeling at the time and what I think a lot of people were feeling at the time. Um, and it was kind of like a way to express what it would be like to move on from a bad experience. And I feel like when Roe versus Wade was overturned, that was a point of no return. Like at that point, I was no longer going to family barbecues, talking to my conservative aunts and uncles, or there was no more of that at that point. If I feel like that was like a line in the sand, and I never really could get over that. And I don't think a lot of people, I think there's a lot of people that have not gotten over that. So Death to the Man was sort of like my way of healing from that experience because it hit me even though I am male, even though I have daughters that I want them to grow up and be in control of their own lives and their own decisions. So that's where that song came from.
Cool. The next song is "Tired of Losing," which I featured last time you were on the podcast, and that song kind of speaks to, I guess, the feeling of kind of us against the world, but also, or us against the universe, but also us versus them sort of mentality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And yeah, that was a song that I had written in memory of my brother Ryan. And I wrote it like on Christmas morning, and 3 days later, I was at Nico Sells' house recording it. I gave Nico a kayak in exchange for some studio time. It's just not like a real kayak, but a blow up kayak. When my brother died, I bought a kayak, and it was sort of like an impulsive decision. It wasn't very well thought out, and I used it a few times in our local lake, which is pretty dirty. And I guess I kind of did that a few times. I blew it up and I took it to the lake, and after a few times of that, I realized I wasn't really into it, and so but I gave it to Nico in exchange for some studio time, and we recorded that song. And then just about a month after that, I went to Christian Alfonso's and recorded it. And he did such a fabulous job with the keyboard arrangements and so much more. He came up with a killer drum beat. And I guess you could say that it was then that I knew that I had an album on my hands, that I wasn't just making demos, but that there was something developing. And so once we do that, I think it was about roughly a year to finish the album, a year of consistent work.
Nice. All right, the next song is "Be Good to the Earth," which I feel like has a pretty straightforward message of we got to take care of this planet. It's the only one we got, is one of my favorite lines in that song. You know, sometimes a lot of people may wax poetic and try to like hide a message behind, metaphors and stuff like that. But sometimes just having like come out and saying like, here's the deal, man, like can really be powerful. And I think that comes across in this song.
Well, the song started out really as like some of the others on the record. It started out as a song that I didn't necessarily realize how that it was serious. I was saying "Be Good to the Earth" in the style of it was inspired by the Kiss song "Lick It Up." And I try to come up with this sort of hedonistic chorus. And I kind of did that intentionally. I was thinking about, well, if you're going to try to convince people to do good by the earth and for the earth, you're going to have to try to make them feel like there's something in it for them, that they're getting something out of this deal. And so I guess you could say that the result of that was a hedonistic vibe and maybe even a feel-good vibe. Like my co-producer, Christian Alfonso, had told me that that's the song on the record that he always saw as the hit, that he always saw as the one that had the best vibes and the good vibes. Because there's a lot of songs on this album that might come across as kind of bitchy and nasty, whereas "Be Good to the Earth" is a feel-good kind of song. And it draws inspiration from, like Kiss, Dave Matthews, Jane's Addiction, Tina Turner. The list goes on. It's like a lot of my influences just blended together, and it just worked out.
Yeah, those are pretty nice. I would say I was like really looking for like trying to dig into some of the influence I felt on this record, but it definitely feels like an amalgamation of like different vibes and feelings, and so I'm glad you threw some of those names out there. It definitely makes sense. So the next
Oh yeah,
song,
thank you for that.
so the next song was my favorite song on the record, which is
Oh.
They Don't Think About Me, which is kind of like a jab at social media, the feeling of isolation in a world of people that are quick to forget things.
Yes, there is a line on there that talks about that sort of isolating feeling as it relates to social media. Like I do a little bit of name drop, not name dropping. There's like an allusion there, like FB and IG. But I'll tell you what, that song, I'm so glad you said it's your favorite. It was the last song that I had written for the record. I thought the record was done already. And me and my wife, Maraf, we were watching this series on TV called Daisy Jones and the Six. And it was about a young woman named Daisy Jones who, in the 1970s, Sunset Strip Hollywood music scene, she had struggled to get recognition when she was a singer in a band with five guys that had moved to Hollywood from Pennsylvania, and they were established, and she was like the newcomer in the band, and and I feel like I related to her struggle to be heard and to be recognized. This was at a time when the music industry was extremely male dominated um, and in the 1970s, it was almost like they were trying to recreate Fleetwood Mac in a fictional story. So watching that left me inspired, but but the inspiration for that also comes from a dark place in my own world as well. Um, when I'm sorry to bring up my late brother again, but my brother, when he died, in the aftermath of that, I felt like people in my family didn't really appreciate me, and I was kind of like, hey, you still have me. I'm still here, and I felt like there wasn't really a great deal of interest. Again, there's interest in my beautiful children, there's interest in my family, but there was not any interest in me or understanding of where I was coming from. And I had just stopped talking to my parents after like, I think I was just like a couple months after kind of ripping that Band-Aid off. And when I wrote They Don't Think About Me, I was kind of thinking about what it's like to have survivor's guilt and to be the only surviving sibling. And so there's a little bit of survivor's guilt in there, but it's also a song that speaks to like that isolation where you wonder, is anyone really thinking about me? Now, this is a song that I guess it's one of the bluesier ones on the record, um, and I think that it comes from a personal place, but I also would say it wouldn't have happened probably if I had not watched 10 episodes of Daisy Jones and the Six, which I highly recommend. It's based on a novel by the novelist Taylor Jenkins Reid. Great, great book and I think a great series as well.
Very, very cool. All right. Next song is East Coast Blues, which is a really beautiful track. Has some really cool guitar work in it. Tell me a little bit about that song.
Well, that is the second most recent song that was written when I was days away from going into the studio, and I was sitting by the pool just watching my kids swim. I can be a bit of a cat sometimes where I don't like to go in the water. Well, bleach blonde hair, you don't want to just jump in the water, right? So I'm kind of like I don't really like swimming pools the way I used to. So I'm sitting by there by the pool watching my kids swim, and the lyrics just kind of flowed out of me. And with East Coast blues, I mentioned a lot of places that I've been, like California, Amsterdam, and it's told through the perspective of imagine if you are living another life, if I'm living another life, and I'm seeing what my life is like here, East Coast just going through the day-to-day drudgery and the routine. And I wrote it as if I was a Californian, watching my life in Maryland as it happened, like from a sort of a bird's eye view. And I don't know how it happened. I don't know what led me to write it as far as like, because I guess like in the winter, I feel kind of, sometimes I get kind of depressed in the winter. And as it was getting colder and I was, you know, um, just sitting by the pool that day, I was just sitting on my phone, just plugging away lyrically. And when I got home, all the guitar parts, everything just came together.
Nice. Cool. So you had mentioned on another song how you kind of wrote it on the bass. I believe at one point you mentioned that like this album in general, like you were kind of trying to approach it in that way, and I definitely feel that way when I'm listening to the next song. I know the feeling. Great bass work in that song. Talk about that song and kind of like the idea of approaching it from that angle, which I don't think is like a normal way to do it.
Yeah, and I think bass was a pretty important part of that song as well. Um, and I feel like that was a song where we had bass and cello both kind of shining in their own way. There were some songs like Wicked World where I had a killer bass line that I think the cello kind of overshadowed a bit. But with I Know the Feeling, I really feel like we both got a chance to kind of have our moment in the sun, myself and cellist Bailey Dykes, who is the truly the shining star on this record, if there is one. But I Know the Feeling was written primarily as a very simple, almost country-esque Nashville singer-songwriter style, acoustic guitar, as simple as you can get. Like it's really just like a few chords. But when the bass came in, I started going for something that was a little bit more punchy and had a counter sort of melody that could go with the song's melody and parts. And so while this song was written on guitar, now we're going back to the other end of the spectrum where we're looking at one of the first songs that was written on Irreverent Soul before I even knew that it was going to be an album. And I was proud of it when I wrote it. And there's sort of a funny story about how the lyrics came about. I was just sitting there one afternoon having a talk with my wife in the living room, and I was trying to sympathize with her. And I said, honey, I know the feeling. And she just looks at me and smiles and says, no, you don't. And I went right downstairs to the basement and wrote the song in 10 minutes. And
Nice.
she still thinks I'm full of shit. But but I wrote
Sometimes they
that.
come together that quickly, man.
Yeah, man. And it was the kind of thing where I was writing about things that I thought people could relate to, like being stuck in a lame job or not having a loving situation at home. And when my kids hear it, they always say, Daddy, what do you mean when you say, your job is lame, at home, no love? That's the first line. And I said, I wasn't talking about our family now. I might have been talking about what it was like for me growing up. Because sometimes I sing about not things that are a part of my life now, but things that might have defined my life earlier. Because I think that as far as like family and friends and professional success, I feel like my life is better now than it has ever been. And I've been through some tough times, but I feel like right now this is prime time right now. And but sometimes I like to sing about things that are a little bit like, might make me sound like I'm a kind of a tormented, blues singer or something. Like I might say things that might lead the listener to think that my life is not as good as it is. And so I always try to emphasize that I don't always sing about what's going on in my life now. The world might be upside down, the world might be on fire, but I think my life is pretty good. And I sometimes need to draw upon the tough times for that inspiration. And I think that I Know the Feeling was a song where I wanted to communicate empathy. I wanted to encourage empathy because I feel like that, as well as like with Be Good to the Earth, there's not a lot of songs that encourage empathy or environmental awareness. And so there's songs on Irreverent Soul that kind of throw those conventions into the wind and say, well, I'm gonna try to encourage those things, and people can take it or leave it.
Nice. Well, first of all, I'm glad we shouted out Bailey. I was hoping to give him a shout out because there's some great string work on this album. And yes, the idea that a song could offer like a form, almost like a form of closure, if like you haven't like, I know that I in particular like deal with a lot of the feeling that no one really, I don't really get the chance to express how I feel about certain things, or being able to get that sort of closure in a moment. And so sometimes a song can give you that moment to say what you want to say, and then just kind of move on from that. So that's pretty cool.
The
All right.
process, yeah, healing process for sure.
The final song on the record is Let Death Die, which was probably my second favorite. It's got some great vocal melodies on it. The title Let Death Die is kind of like a very, has like an essence of finality to it. And I think it's a great closing song for the album, which is like something I've always been interested in, is like I'm always like, how good's the opener song? How good's the closing song on a record? Because I feel like that kind of tells you like how good a record is if the opening and the closers really kind of really sell it.
Yeah, I appreciate that because it is a sort of thing where the last song and the first song might have a connection. So, well, the last song, Let Death Die, is it was written fairly early on. I would say it was one of the first songs that was written. And I recall that was, 2022. These songs are kind of percolating. And I wrote Let Death Die thinking about all the people that I had lost. And it wasn't just my brother. There were a lot of people that, like my godfather, who oversaw my conversion to Judaism, was a brilliant doctor named Joe Napora. He died at the age of 90. And then a week later, my favorite musician in the world died, and that was Taylor Hawkins. And so two really big important people in my world had just died unexpectedly. And Dr. Joe Napora was like a very, very robust and healthy 90-year-old. Like no one expected him to die. I thought he was going to live to be at least 100, so that was a bit of a shock. And then with Taylor Hawkins dying at the age of 50 was that really just kind of just turned the music world upside down. And and I think you could say like 21 was when I lost my brother Ryan, and then 22, just the early 2020s, just people were just dying a lot. And I was just, overwhelmed with it to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted to say, let death die, as a way to say that maybe death is not the end, that maybe um, that this is just a step along the way, and that we're all here in this universe. And, but when we fall off, and nobody knows when that's going to happen. And so I guess you could say that that Let Death Die was my way of coping with loss.
Beautiful, man. Like it's a great record. Like lots of great work on there.
Thank
Who
you.
played drums on it, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, Christian Alfonso is responsible for that. He's responsible for the beats as well as any additional percussion. Um, so that was all Christian Alfonso. He's also in a folk duo called Quiet the Mountain with Jimmy Stewart, and
Nice.
they're really great. They play a lot around the DMV area, and so that was all Christian. Is this basically recorded? There's just three of us that played on the record. We're in the process of sort of getting together as a band for our band gigs, and that's going to include My Useless Self and Bag of Humans drummer Jeremy Constanzer, and the guitarist from Black Sevens, my friend Paris Tallheimer. He was just over my house today, just rehearsing for this gig, and he plays a really pretty amazing electric guitar. So we're looking forward to sort of coalescing together as a band, as a five-piece. But the record, we recorded it as a trio.
Nice. Um, So you mentioned earlier the band My Useless Self, which we talked a little bit about that last time, and that's a really cool project you're in. I wanted to ask because there was a show that happened sometime last year where there was a band marketed as Museless Elf. Is that a thing that happened? And can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that that was one of Nico's sort of little gimmicks. I don't mean to say gimmick in a dismissive way. It might very well be deadly serious. But it may have been for a holiday show or something. Like, like we usually get together, summer, Christmas. We're a band that we share the stage maybe, on a good year, maybe 6 times a year. And that might include a local festival. That might include a holiday event. It might include like Sawebo Fest. We do that year after year in Southwest Baltimore. So there's a lot of things we do like every year. Um, and I believe, if I remember correctly, that that might have been what Nico had planned for Christmas a couple years ago.
Well, did it involve like a change in the set, or were you guys basically just playing the same stuff?
Oh, it was just the same stuff. I mean, it was kind of
Okay,
like, imagine if you will, like the Foo Fighters going to play a gig in a tunnel and underground in London, some underground tunnel in London, and I think they call themselves the Holy Shits.
nice.
And then the fans go there and see it's actually the Foo Fighters.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I remember seeing that and just being intrigued by the concept. But then I was also like, well, maybe it's just another band with a similar name because that's happened before too. But that's pretty cool. Well,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, awesome. You've got the album coming out March 14th, or I'm sorry, the album's coming out, yes, March 14th, and then the release show is the same day at Zen West with Brad Cox, Sons of Avery, Blank Slate, and Luca. And and yeah, it's good, man. There's some singles out there under Credito, and anything else you want to add before you go, Derek?
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to another event a few weeks after that. On April the 5th, I'll be playing an acoustic set with the band again. That will be at Fury Winery. Fury Winery is located in Pilesville, Maryland. And I'm looking forward to doing a stripped down version of the songs and maybe throwing in some covers as well and just making it a fun time. So it's almost like a second CD release party. And on March 9th, just before the release, I'll be co-hosting an event with Acacia Sears in Ellicott City at Backwater Books in the upstairs of that bookstore. It's a boutique bookstore, beautiful bookstore on Main Street in Ellicott City. And upstairs, in the upstairs, there's like a it's called the Bibliopub, and it's very spacious and it has a lot to offer, I think, as far as acoustics go. So I'm very excited to be co-hosting with Acacia Sears and with Waylon Nash and his brother Rick Ivy. We're going to be having this event for the first time, the first Bibliopub event on March 9th, which is a Sunday. So I'll have some more details about that hopefully soon. But yeah, that's what's on the planner at the moment.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this, and I hope to see you soon. And oh,
Absolutely.
one more thing. So you were one of my earlier guests. So before I had kind of created this little fun game, we probably have like time for a couple questions, but these are just like little fun questions I've been throwing out at people, and it's just kind of just to spice it up a little bit, have throw little curveballs at you. But so just a few questions. What's your go-to karaoke song?
My go-to karaoke song. I have not sung karaoke in such a long time. I feel like the last time might have been like at the Overly Station back when it was the Overly Station. Um, I think my favorite song to sing karaoke, this might come as a surprise, but I really like to sing Guns N' Roses. I think You Could Be Mine is a Guns N' Roses song that I really enjoy singing it. It's pretty straightforward rock and roll in a pretty high register too. But I think that was one that I used to love singing karaoke. If I had to go to, like if I was going through flipping through the catalog and not knowing what to sing, I would probably just reach for that one.
Nice. What's a song or album that brings back a strong memory for you? Or maybe like makes you, reminds you of something?
Oh, I got one for you. It's the band Extreme, and the album was 1990s Pornography. Um, that album, I started listening to it right before I got my first guitar, like in 1990. And then I switched from extreme to like I guess there was grunge and then there was Guns N' Roses that were coming back at the time. So at some point I didn't really listen to extreme that much anymore. But their second album, Pornography, really takes me back. I went to Musicians Institute in Hollywood in 2001, and I went to an open house there. And I was thinking about enrolling, and I saw a band, a three-piece instrumental band covering "Get the Funk Out," which is the third song. It's kind of an innuendo song, but that was the song on that album that really stands out for me because when I remember hear that song, I remember not just when it came out when I was a 13-year-old boy, but I also remember, a decade later when I was in a Hollywood classroom watching this brilliant trio of musicians getting observed by their teacher as they played this song that I couldn't even wrap my head around it at the time. My skills weren't quite there yet. And I guess you could say that I was a little bit intimidated, and ultimately I decided not to go to Musicians Institute. Um, but um, but hearing that song, it always takes me back to two places in my life, the early 90s and the early 2000s. It's
Cool.
not like the most timeless music out there. It's kind of glammy and it kind of sounds like it's got a late 80s, early 90s timestamp. But I'll tell you, that's my favorite music. It's my favorite music, is really that period when I was young and I was playing piano and starting to get into the guitar and music was becoming, the central part of my life at that point. So music that comes from that period is really, that's where the memories are for me. And yeah, not that everything after that was not also great, but there's something about that early time, that early period in my musical life that really stands out. And Extreme, uh, the album, as well as that song, you might also remember More Than Words or Wholehearted, other songs on that album that were maybe bigger hits. But Get the Funk Out. I play that song whenever I feel like I suck at bass. I pick up that song and I play it note for note. I'm like, yeah, man, I got it.
Nice. All right, last one. If you could have an animal sidekick, what would it be?
That's an easy one. The giraffe.
Nice.
I have
That's
a
pretty.
wooden giraffe upstairs in my near my kids' bedrooms. And just a quick story about this, but when we were in LA recently, we went to the LA Zoo. We went there before the fires, and we were at the LA Zoo, and I was really drawn to the giraffes, and I could look into their eyes and see the sadness, like they didn't want to be there, and maybe they knew that there were wildfires that were coming. So I've always felt like the giraffe and a special connection to the giraffe.
Nice. Well, thank you for doing this, Derek. Zoom's about to kick us off, but uh, go check out the album. It'll be everywhere March 14th. Peace out, brother.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, man. See you soon.
See you soon. Follow the link in the description to check out more music from Credito. Their album, Irreverent Soul, should be available by the time this drops. So go check it out. See you guys soon.